Hello, everyone. This is the first of 4 lessons on informal fallacies. An informal fallacy is a deceptively bad argument. In a fallacious argument, something's gone wrong in the reasoning, rendering the argument unreliable. Many fallacies are seductive, though. They frequently work in the sense that people are taken in by them, even though the reasoning is seriously flawed. In this video, we'll look at 2 very common informal fallacies, the false dilemma and the fallacy of equivocation. Subsequent videos will deal with other informal fallacies. Let's start with the false dilemma. A false dilemma fallacy is an argument that includes a premise that is a false dilemma. A dilemma is simply an or statement, like you can have fries or you can have chips. A dilemma is false if it leaves out viable options, like the button on the right. Why is the statement, you can love it or you can leave it, a false dilemma? What options does it leave out? I'll help you out with this one. If you don't love your country, you could, for instance, stick around and try to fix it. Or if you don't love your country, you could sit around and criticize it. Those are other options that everybody seems to have besides leaving their country. Let's look at some other examples of false dilemmas. In 2001, while trying to build international support for a military invasion of Iraq in response to the 9/11 attacks, President George W. Bush made the following statement. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Parents are known to commit this mistake as well as presidents. For instance, either you're first or you're last, said to an athlete. Or, if you don't get an A, you failed, said to a student. If it isn't already obvious to you what the other available options are that lie between these 2 horns of these dilemmas, go ahead and hit pause and think about each one of them. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. Either you're first or you're last. Or if you don't get an A, you failed. And think about what other options there are. The options presented in false dilemmas are often extreme points on a spectrum, not always, but often, which is why this fallacy sometimes goes by the name fallacy of black and white thinking. This type of thinking usually leaves out the gray area between these 2 options. Now let's look at the fallacy of equivocation. To equivocate is to shift the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument. Using the same word in 2 different ways can make an argument appear valid on its face, but meaning shift usually results in an invalid argument. Here's an kind of silly but also very easy to analyze example. Premise 1, hot dogs are better than nothing. Premise 2, nothing is better than steak. Therefore, hot dogs are better than steak. Can you spot the equivocation? The equivocation centers on the use of the term nothing here in the 2 premises. Nothing in the first premise means something like not eating or maybe even starving. Hot dogs are better than not eating, or they're better than starving. But that's not what nothing means in the second premise. Nothing is better than steak literally means there are no things ranked above steak. And so it uses the word nothing in a very, very different way. On the face of it, this argument has sort of that sing-songy transitivity move that looks good. For instance, if I'd said A is greater than B and B is greater than C, it would follow that A is greater than C, assuming I'm not equivocating on A, B, or C, or is better than, or is greater than. But here, because the word nothing is being used in two different ways, the logic breaks down. Hot dogs are better than starving is one way of restating the first premise. Hot dogs are better than starving. And one way of restating the second premise would be to say steak is the best. And from those two statements, it simply doesn't follow that hot dogs are better than steak. So the equivocation means that there's a breakdown in the logic of the argument. Here's another example, one you may actually have seen somewhere. It's pretty common. Premise 1, I have the right to do or say X. Therefore, it is right for me to do or say X. The term right is being used in two very different ways in this little argument. And because of the shift in meaning, the logic breaks down and the argument simply doesn't work. In the first premise, the word right seems to be referring to a freedom or liberty granted under the law, for instance, under our Constitution. This means that, if I have the right to do or say something, what that means is that the government cannot legitimately come in and stop me from doing it. I have the right to free speech, for instance. But when I say in the conclusion, it's right for me to do or say X, I'm using the word in a different way. I'm saying that it is an ethically correct course of action, or at least an ethically permissible course of action. However, there would be lots of things that you have the legal right to do, which wouldn't be the ethically best course of action. Let's look at one more example of an equivocation. And this one is very attractive to lots and lots of people. Premise 1, the theory of evolution is just that, a theory. Premise 2, what's just a theory falls short of knowledge. Premise 3, what falls short of knowledge shouldn't be taught in schools. And therefore, the theory of evolution shouldn't be taught in schools. Can you spot the equivocation? You might pause this video and see if you can figure it out. And then unpause when you're ready to proceed. The equivocation centers on this term theory. The word theory is being used in very different ways in the first and second premises. The theory of evolution is just that, a theory. In this sense, the theory of to say that a theory in science is a theory is to say that it's an empirically successful scientific idea, usually backed up by multiple independent lines of evidence. And in fact, the theory of evolution is a theory in this sense. In the second premise, the claim is that what's just a theory falls short of knowledge. This sense of theory is common, but it's not used, this isn't the way the word is used in science. So we do use the word theory in sort of an everyday casual conversation to refer to somebody's unsubstantiated opinion, speculation, or conjecture, something like a hunch or a guess. So if I told you about my theory about when the quarantine or lockdown might be lifted, it would just be my unsubstantiated opinion. I'm not a public health expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. I haven't read the journal articles on this stuff. So I don't have a well worked out scientific idea backed up by multiple independent lines of evidence. I might have a hunch though. Notice in this argument, we can't replace one sense of the theory of the word theory with the other. So if we go back and look at premise 1 and say the theory of evolution is just that, a theory, If we take that use of the word theory in sense 2, the claim is simply false. The theory of evolution is not an unsubstantiated opinion, speculation, conjecture, hunch, or guess. It's a terrifically successful scientific idea backed up by multiple lines of evidence. What about if we use the first sense of theory in premise 2? What's just a theory falls short of knowledge. Is that true? That a scientifically well worked out idea backed up by multiple lines of evidence is not count as knowledge? That would be a very strange use of the word knowledge. So the appearance of validity here depends on using the word theory in these two premises. But when we realize that we're using the word theory in two very different ways, the logic of the argument breaks down. The conclusion no longer goes through. Well, there you have it. This is our first short video on the informal fallacies. In this video, we took a look at these two fallacies, the false dilemma and the fallacy of equivocation. And keep your eyes peeled for the next few videos.